At the end of his flower ceremony each springtime, the late Czech minister, Reverend Norbert Fabian Capek, offered this prayer over the bouquets that the people in his church had created. Infinite Spirit of life, we ask thy blessing on these messengers of fellowship. May they remind us amid diversities of gifts to be in one in desire and devotion. May they also remind us of the value of doing and sharing alike. May we realize that whatever we can do, great or small, the efforts of all of us are needed to do thy work in this world. Nearly a century later, we recognize his words as a prayer for human flourishing. Flourishing is a word you may have heard more frequently this particular spring than in any years previously. It got a lot of press as prominent social scientists began to hypothesize what Americans might need to recover from the pandemic as our nation started to reopen. In a New York Times opinion piece, Adam Grant, an organizational psychologist from the University of Pennsylvania, noted that in the midst of prolonged closures across the country, few of us were flourishing at peak well-being. Instead, he suggested that languishing might be the dominant emotion of 2021, with its chronic sense of stagnation. Forget flourishing. Part of the danger is that when you're languishing, you might not notice the dulling of delight or the dwindling of drive, Dr. Grant observed. Even if you're not languishing, you might know people who are. Understanding it better can help you help them. A simple yet effective strategy for managing any feelings of languishing is to name them as such, and to remember that flourishing should be our common ambition. We can resist that dulling of delight and that dwindling of drive together. To foster flourishing, Dr. Grant recommended that we try to find states of flow, where we are absorbed in meaningful activity or experiencing a powerful bond. That we maintain motivation around projects and mark whatever progress we can make toward goals. That we take care to note the challenges we meet and celebrate any triumphs. Dr. Grant reminded us, languishing is not merely in our heads, it's in our circumstances. So we can work to create circumstances that are more favorable to our collective flourishing, fragile and rooted as we all are. But first, we need to know what those favorable and unfavorable circumstances are. The Human Flourishing Program at Harvard University has produced a great deal of research about what factors are involved in the good life. The director of that program, epidemiologist Tyler G. Vanderweel, told the press, "We usually think about flourishing as living in a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. It's an all-encompassing notion. Some key aspects include community and connection. Both were curtailed over the long course of this pandemic, and we all felt the effects of that. We should plan to become much more intentional about cultivating community and connection as part of our reemergence as a society, our successful reemergence." Early this June, members and friends of U Wellesley Hills held the book discussion of our 2021 Common Read cast, The Origin of Our Discontents. Its author, Isabel Wilkerson, was the first African-American woman to win a Pulitzer Prize in journalism. Her own experience of achieving against all odds in America informed her writing. Many of those experiences were quite painful to read, as those of you who participated in the conversation can attest. In the congregational resolution we passed in June 2020, we affirmed that Black Lives Matter and committed ourselves to learning about racial injustice in the United States. Wilkerson reminded us just how long that history was and traced it back to 1619 in the American colonies. It was in the making of the New World that Europeans became white Africans black, and everyone else yellow, red, or brown, ranked to form a caste system based on a new concept called race, she knew. It was in the process of ranking that we were all cast into assigned roles to meet the needs of the larger production. None of us are ourselves. None of us are ourselves. In such a restrictive caste system, none of us are actually flourishing. One of the things that the pandemic revealed was how many disturbing disparities continue to exist along racial, ethnic, gender, and class lines. Wilkerson underscored all of them. She also asked her readers to try and imagine an American reality where this degree of disparity was not our national default. What if people of color did not die at disproportionate rates from COVID-19? What if we did not ask entire populations to be quite so resilient, crisis after crisis? What if they did not have to defy perpetual hardship and always struggle so hard just to survive? What if we could all reset our expectations and train our ambitions? In a world without caste, being male or female, light or dark, immigrant or native born would have no bearing on what anyone was perceived as being capable of. In a world without caste, we would all be invested in the well-being of others in our species, if only for our own survival, Wilkerson concluded. And we would recognize that we are in need of one another far more than we have been led to believe. A world without caste would set everyone free. Everyone could finally become their fullest selves. Admittedly, that world may be a ways off in the future yet, but it matters that we can allow ourselves to envision it. This week, both the President and Vice President of the United States signed a law making Juneteenth a federal holiday, marking the end of chattel slavery in this country. June 19th commemorates the overdue announcement in 1865 to enslaved African Americans in Texas that the Emancipation Proclamation had a couple of years earlier guaranteed their release from captivity. Because June 19th fell on a Saturday this year, the holiday was observed on a Friday. On short notice, government offices and public schools were closed. All Americans can feel the power of this day, the president said in a ceremony at the White House, that same national landmark built by enslaved Americans, and learn from our history, he added. The vice president noted that throughout its history, Juneteenth has been known by various names, including Freedom Day, Liberation Day, and Jubilee Day. That last name is my favorite, I think. It captures the feeling as much as the fact of freedom. If we are to flourish, we must feel free as well as be free. The significance of this Juneteenth holiday is that it makes the freedom of every last one of us the concern for all of us and the cause of our collective celebration. It reminds us that our liberation is bound up in one another's. The president said that declaring the holiday was a symbolic part the larger program of his administration was undertaking to challenge systemic racism and achieve racial equity. It seems like an important start. As any religious professional will tell you, there is a tremendous power in symbol, a tremendous power in ritual. For this reason, we enact certain rites again and again, rites like our flower ceremony. Reverend Capek began it in 1923, only 2 years after he returned to his homeland from an extended ministry in the US. He saw what World War I had done to his fellow citizens and lamented that the mass trauma left so many of them languishing for years afterwards. He wanted them to recall beauty and blossoming and reverence both. He wanted them to allow for the possibility, at least, of their flourishing in their particular faith community. This year, like last year, we are holding our UU Wellesley Hills flower ceremony virtually. But this year, unlike last year, we were able to have a large in-person gathering in our church courtyard ahead of the end of the program year in June. Most of the flowers for our slideshow were taken during that happy occasion. If you were there, you know that our party favors were plant and grow paper flowers. These are eco-friendly plantable seed papers from American meadows, cut out in the shape of blooms and embedded with wildflower seeds. We were promised that they would sprout and grow in any sunny spot. Honestly, I doubt that. I think that at minimum, yes, they all need sunshine. Please do plant your paper flowers in a sunlit place. But I suggest that you also plant them in rich soil if you can and water them when they get dry. If we truly value flourishing as a spiritual principle, then we will tend to conditions such that they will support flourishing overall. Reverend Capek not only invited his congregants to bring the prettiest wildflowers from the Czech countryside into the sanctuary, but he partnered with local professionals to offer them supportive programming as well. Parenting classes, marriage counseling, health services, and educational offerings all through the church. Eventually, his congregation grew to become the largest Unitarian church in the world, I suspect because the people there were all growing together. They cared about their own growth in addition to one another's. Reverend Capek's presence was so overwhelmingly and conspicuously positive that during World War II, the Nazis considered him a dangerous enemy of the Third Reich, had him arrested, and then killed him. A century later, we look at our wildflowers the way he taught us to, as a promise of the potential we all have to flourish in favorable conditions. Much of the research that the Human Flourishing Program has done is available now online. It extensively documents the benefits of participating regularly in religious community, which to my mind makes it all the more credible. But you might want to acquaint yourself with its work, or at the very least, take its quiz to gauge whether you are languishing or flourishing these days. Do as Dr. Grant suggests and open up an honest dialogue around flourishing. Share the quiz with your family and friends as a goodwill gesture. Become a vocal and faithful advocate for full human flourishing. If you want, you can also download the app Harvard has developed for smartphones, or follow the program on Twitter or listen to its latest podcasts. Help educate and empower yourself and others as we start to recover from this pandemic. Reverend Capek is right that we are all called to do the work of infinite spirit here in the world, so our collective growth is encouraged and not impeded. Before his tragic death, Reverend Capek wrote nearly 100 hymns, many of which are still sung today. One of them was about the planting to be done, and the planting he himself did. Onward, 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 let the plow break up the soil, he sang. In place of old habits, let the creative spirit reign. Onward, 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 the plow digs deeper. We will each need to push our plows in the days to come. That said, my husband Ben and I have yet to plant our seed paper. Truth be told, there are hardly any sunny spots in our yard, so I suspect that a container garden might be in our future. We shall see. Plant your seed paper with an eye to the hyper-local conditions, certainly in your microclimate. But do it with tender hands, too, and a hopeful heart. Many of you, I know, find that desired and delightful state of flow in your gardens. Maybe there your wildflowers will be planted in joyous celebration of Juneteenth all across America. Maybe they will be planted in tribute to Reverend Capek and his inspired church. Maybe they will be planted in memory of those lives lost to the coronavirus and in honor of all those heroic sorts who combated it. Maybe they will be planted simply to mark the start of a new season soon arriving. Regardless, I hope they grow well. I hope they bloom. I hope they flourish a good long while yet. And I hope that each of you does too. I hope that each of you flourishes and flies.